Hello, my name is Angela Hayes and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni and Online Career Engagement. Thank you for joining us to discuss this very important topic. During about the first 30 minutes or so, I'll be presenting some information and asking you some questions or to comment on a few things so that we can share our perceptions and ideas about this issue. I'd like to ask that during that time, you jot down your questions rather than putting them in the chat box, because the second half of our time together will be devoted completely to questions and answers. Also in the chat, you'll see that Dakota has put two documents. One of them is a longer salary negotiation document that you can go through to get ready to do negotiation. And then the other one is just a short one to glance at right before you go in. So you can use them for different kinds of things. You'll find my contact information at the end of this presentation, and then also on the longer document, my email is at the top. I would be delighted to talk to you more about any of the issues that we cover, or if any of you, because as alum, you get free access to any sort of job search kinds of things or salary negotiation, mock interviews, anything that has to do with job search or performance on the job, professional development, any of those kinds of things. I'm delighted to talk to you about those. So here's the things that we're going to cover tonight: what the wage gap is, how it affects you, why it happens, how to determine your worth in the marketplace, and then how to effectively build your negotiation skills. So let's get started. Wage discrimination has been illegal since the Equal Pay Act of 1963, but it still continues. Before the pandemic, it was estimated that if it kept going at the rate it was going, the pay gap would close by 2059. But the World Economic Forum recently released a report saying that the pandemic has set women back so far, and I hate to tell you this, but so far that it'll likely be 135 years before women will be paid the same as a man for exactly the same work, and 268 years before women get the same pay for similar work as men. So those are the cases where the jobs are very similar, but there's wiggle room in terms of the salary. And the gap falls across all occupations. Women's full-time earnings are less than men's in almost all of the top 20 most common occupations for women. And in fact, when men come into a predominantly female-oriented or mostly jobs that women take, the wages go up for men, but not for women. And it's the same across the 20 most common occupations for men, that men are getting paid significantly more. The lockdowns have hit female-dominated sectors the hardest and left women doing more household chores, more homeschooling of their children, even if they didn't have to drop out of the workforce, which many did. Very, very many did have to drop out of the workforce. But for those working at home who are also doing childcare and taking on a lot more of the household responsibilities, maybe caring for aging parents, all those kinds of things, this has affected their productivity, the chances for raises, the likelihood of promotions. Even if it didn't affect their productivity, even if they were just as productive or more productive, the perception is that they aren't as productive or can't be as productive because of the fact that they're caring for children or there's children in the house. Research has also found that during and post-pandemic, women are significantly less likely to be hired for leadership roles than they were a little over 2 years ago. just before the pandemic. So we've talked a bit about what the wage gap is and how it affects you. Let's talk about why it happens. In the chat box, why do you think the wage gap happens? There's a lot of layers. What do you think some of the layers are for why this happens? Okay, and for those of you, if you haven't pulled up the chat box, you just hover over the bottom, you'll see it, and you could pull it up. And you'll see the documents that you can download. And then also, if you would, let me know why you think some of the reasons, what are some of the reasons why the wage gap happens. Sometimes it's an unconscious action. Good old boys club, absolutely. And there's a lot of research on that, that even when a woman's negotiating with a woman, the manager or whoever they're negotiating with, they have their own unconscious biases that they're not even aware of, that causes them to offer less or be less likely to negotiate a higher salary. Any other ideas? Okay, a few other things are that women are much less likely to negotiate. We'll talk about that more later. We'll talk about the percentage of employers who expect people to try to negotiate as opposed to how many women actually do negotiate. There's also a lot of stereotypes about women in the workforce that affect that wage gap. What do you think some of the stereotypes might be? If you would, just drop that in the chat. Well, young women, especially young married women of childbearing years, there's a stereotype that she'll probably want to have kids and then she'll want to work part-time. And so there's no use really investing too much in her. And this goes for women who are of childbearing years, but never plan to have children. They still pay that penalty without even realizing it. And there's stereotypes about men, why men get paid more. We'll talk about that more later, but one of them is he's got a family to support, so we should pay him more. He's got a family, so he's steadier and he's more devoted, and he'll probably work harder. And as we said, COVID made all these kinds of things worse, these stereotypes, and it made the wage gap worse. So let's talk a bit about Equal Pay Day. Equal Pay Day has been in April every year for many years. The date in April represents how far the average woman has to work into the following year to make what the average man made the year prior. In 2019, Equal Pay Day was on March 31st, so that was progress. It wasn't in April anymore, it was March 31st. We were making a little bit of progress. This year it was March 15th, but that's because a lot of women dropped out. We'll talk about that more later, but a lot of women dropped out of the workforce. And so it seems that we made progress that we didn't actually make. We'll come back to that. So this date, this March 15th, is based on the latest US Census figures. That's if we're averaging all women and men. Now, in the past, this date and the amount on the dollar that women make compared to men was based on just full-time year-round workers. This year, a new methodology was used because COVID pushed many women, especially women of color, into part-time or seasonal work. So for 2022, the Equal Pay Day Coalition adopted a new, more inclusive methodology that also addresses women who work part-time or seasonally to get a more accurate picture of how the gender pay gap impacts diverse communities. So women in general make 83 cents on the dollar that a man makes. In 2019, it was 80 cents, but Black women make 58 cents on the dollar. So their equal pay day, so the amount of time they'd have to work into the next year to make what the average man made the year before, their equal pay day is September 21st. Now it was 62 cents on the dollar in 2019, so we're losing ground. And Latina women make 49 cents on the dollar, so their equal pay day is December 8th, and it was 54 cents on the dollar in 2019. Native American women, it's 50 cents on the dollar, so their equal pay day is November 30th. For LGBTQ and transgender women, it's even worse across the board. And further education certainly increases wages for women, but women with graduate degrees earn less on average than men with bachelor's degrees. If the woman is a mother, the pay disparity gets much worse. For example, equal pay day for mothers in 2019, they haven't figured it yet for this last year. In 2019, equal pay day for mothers was June 4th. Equal pay day for Black mothers was July 31st, and equal pay day for Latina mothers was November 2nd. Something to keep in mind is that the pay disparity gets more pronounced with each child that a woman has. And these figures are full-time working mothers. This doesn't include those who work part-time or take time off. This is full-time working mothers. Mothers are less likely to be hired. They receive lower salaries when they are hired. They're also significantly less likely to get promoted, which is ironic since research shows again and again that moms are some of the most productive employees. Now, if a mother does decide to take a year off, let's say the year after her child is born, she can expect to make 39% less throughout the rest of her career compared to a mother who did not take that year off. So while the pay gap has decreased over the years, except this last year because of the pandemic, the last couple, it's actually increasing between mothers and fathers. And again, even more so now because of the pandemic. The pay gap between married women with children and married men with children is about 30%. Men can expect an earning increase when they become fathers, while women can expect an earnings decline with each additional child. Those in the lowest paying jobs can expect to incur the largest motherhood penalty. And that's what it's been called, the motherhood penalty and the fatherhood pay boost. And this has a lot to do with the stereotypes that we talked about before. And as I said, even women of childbearing years who don't have children and never plan to have children end up paying this penalty without realizing it, again, because of these stereotypes. So in the chat box, why do you think men get a pay boost when they have children? What are some ideas? Yeah, men are viewed as the provider. So yeah, they've got a family to support, so they should be paid more. And some of the other things we talked about before, that they're expected to now be even better employees because they're the provider, because they're going to want to keep their job and do well at their job. So let's talk about what happens very early on, right out of college. Research tells us that 1 year out of a bachelor's degree, the average woman will make 82 cents on the dollar compared to the man she stood next to at graduation. I dug into this further to see what happens in cases where these two got exactly the same degree, the same grades, the same experience level going in. What I found was that if they took identical jobs at the same company at the same time, the woman would be earning a salary that was 88 cents on the dollar compared to the man in the identical position in the same company. So why does this matter so much? When I'm working with women one-on-one, they often tell me that their starting salary isn't that big of a deal to them. They're just happy to be offered the job, and they know that once they get in there, they'll be able to show what they can do, and they'll undoubtedly get a big raise. And that could happen, but it usually doesn't. Because most organizations have a very set policy about raises, and it generally goes on a yearly percentage system. So if you're making 77 or 82 or even 88% of what a man is making to start, and you each get 5% raises each year, that's assuming he doesn't get promoted over you or you don't get promoted over him, the difference very quickly adds up, not just in salary or salary increases, but also bonuses, which are usually based on a percentage of base pay, and percentage match that's going into retirement and Social Security benefits. So base pay matters a lot. On average, depending on the occupation, the National Women's Law Center puts the average of lost income over the course of a woman's working life at about $406,280. That can top 1 million for Hispanic women and slightly less than 1 million for Black and Native American women. On average, women who have an MBA, a law degree, or a medical degree will lose closer to 2 million. So in the chat box, tell me, what would you do with an extra $1 million? Pay off debt. Yeah. Pay off your house. Yeah. Travel. Nice. Yeah. Yeah. And the thing about this wage gap is that it affects everybody. I mean, it affects our families. It affects the men in our lives, our children. It's not just a woman problem. It's a problem that we all share. It's something that affects all of us. So now that we know more about what the wage gap is and how it affects us, let's start the discussion of how to prepare for salary negotiation. I can't express enough how important it is for you to research what you're worth in the marketplace. Here are some places that you can go to get a good idea of what sort of salary you should be making in a particular job in a particular part of the country, given your education and experience. These are also on your handout. For example, on salary.com, you can put in your industry, job title, geographic location, your education, your experiences, and a variety of other attributes that will then produce a bell-shaped curve to tell you the range of what others in that area would be making at the low end, the middle, and the high end. It'll also give you a line that tells you, based on everything you've put in, what you should be making in that particular position. That gives you a range so that you know going in what you should be making, and that range is golden for you. We don't want to give that power to the employer. It's risky to think, well, they probably know what the position is worth. I'm sure it's a fair offer. I'm just glad to get the offer. I don't want to upset them. I do understand that, and there might be cases where it does seem too risky to negotiate, but we'll be talking about how to greatly decrease that risk and increase your chances of success. So now we know all this about the gap and some of the layers that go into that gap. So let's focus on the art of successful salary negotiation. This issue feels really big and difficult, but that is something we can control. Whether or not we choose to negotiate is within our control. Again, the first place to focus is finding out what you're worth in the marketplace before you even have that first phone screen, because it certainly does happen that they're going to ask you how much you're looking for salary. It could happen in the phone screen. We'll talk in a bit about how to get around that, because it's always best if they're the person that names a number first. The second thing to remember is that you're often dealing with well-trained, well-practiced negotiators. They know how to try to get you to not even try to negotiate, and they know how to make you feel kind of guilty if you do. That's their job. Often they've been told by the higher ups to get the best person for the least cost they can. Keeping that in mind, you'll likely be working with someone who's trained and is obviously looking out for the best interests of the organization. So you need to come in trained and well prepared also. The most common example of a way an employer will try to hire you for the lowest salary possible is to try to get you to name a figure before they've extended a formal offer. Do everything you can not to be the first one to name a figure. So they might say something like, if we offered you X amount for this job, would you accept it? A good response from you would be something like, I'd really like to learn more about the job first. I need to know if I'm a good fit and that you're offering me the job. Or they might say, what kind of salary would it take for you to accept the job? And you can say, if the offer is fair, I'm sure we can reach an agreement. If you were to receive a job offer from us, would you accept it? You can say, while I'm very interested in the job and the company, it depends on the offer. I'd be glad to respond to a specific offer. Or you could say, I'll consider any reasonable offer, or I'm sure you have a figure in mind. Could you share that with me? If they keep pressing you and they won't go forward until you've answered the salary question, then you can say, my research tells me that someone with my skills, education, qualifications in this geographic location should be making between this and this. And then let silence be your friend. Let it sink in that you've done your research and you know what you should be making with reason, justified facts. Also, you might want to bump up the range just a bit from what your research said. Not a lot, just a bit, so that you don't leave money on the table. Now, if they ask you this in a phone screen, bump it down just a bit so you don't screen yourself out. You can always come up later during the negotiation when you find out more about the responsibilities of the job. So you'll want to practice these lines so that they don't feel forced. They should come out easily because they're just common sense and reasonable. Once they've made the offer, ask for it in writing and ask for time to consider the offer. The amount of time varies. For entry-level positions, it might be over the weekend, 3 or 4 days. For higher level positions, it might be a week or even 2 weeks for like executive level positions, or even more. Asking for time to consider the offer buys you time to think about your negotiation approach. It also allows you to look at everything, because you might also have offers from other places. You can look at everything side by side to decide what the best offer is. And you'll want to see everything, the benefits, everything that they're offering. And it also gives them time to get nervous that you might be getting offers from other places and you might accept an offer from somewhere else. Sometimes they'll come back with more just because they think, oh, she's taking time to think through this. That must mean that she's also considering other offers. So it's good to, before you step back into the negotiation, to think through everything, not just the base salary, bonuses, other kinds of things, but benefits, everything, and have it all sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, what's most important to you to what's least important to you, so that you can negotiate other kinds of things. If the salary isn't exactly what you want, there's all kinds of other things you can negotiate. Leave, you might negotiate a one-time signing bonus, cell phone, gym membership, whatever it is that's important to you, make sure you have that written down before you go back into the negotiation. And the negotiation might be in person, it might be over the phone, it might be through email. It depends on what they prefer. A lot of people that I work with kind of prefer to do it through email so that they're not sitting right there in front of the person. So you and the prospective employer can decide what works best. When you're ready to negotiate, your approach and attitude is everything. You want them to feel good about you during and at the end of the negotiation. If you've won the negotiation, but they're not sure if they want to work with you anymore, you haven't won. I've worked with women who think that the way to negotiate is the hardball method that's considered the stereotypical male power negotiation stance. That stereotype involves issuing ultimatums, making negative comments about the offer, asking to talk to someone who knows what I'm worth because obviously you don't, walking out during the middle of it, and so on. So generally, the only time that that would work is if you have a very specific education, background, and skill set that is exceedingly difficult to find, and you're basically their only hope of finding it. If that's the case, they need you. So you can negotiate in a positive professional manner, get better results, and start with a much better working relationship. So, as I mentioned before, women often don't realize that many companies set aside money with the expectation that prospective employees will ask for better compensation. They aren't going to volunteer the extra money, of course, but it's often there. Salary.com found that 84% of employers expect prospective employees to negotiate salary, yet only 20 to 30% of women actually do negotiate. Unless you're dealing with a nonprofit or a small family business, there's usually, on average, because it can depend based on what industry you're in, on average, there's about 3,000 to 5,000 more set aside, especially if their initial offer is a bit below the going rate, but not always. Listen closely to the needs that the employer is expressing and look for ways to meet both your needs and theirs. Together, you're solving the problem. That's at the heart of interest-based negotiation. Think of both of you as being on the same side of the table, working together to meet both your needs and theirs. Absolutely avoid win-lose language. Win-lose language would be things like, I absolutely need 10,000 more, or I can't live with that, or you're kidding, right? Collaborative language is, I really had in mind more than that, but I'm very excited about the opportunity. What can we do? Or my research showed that the range would be closer to X. How can we move towards something like that? Or where's there some flexibility in the offer? Always leave them feeling that they've been treated well by you throughout the process. Show them the type of person that they'd be working with. Also, expect two main types of negotiators when dealing with a company. There's the hardline, closed off posture, kind of scary. They state the amount as if there is no negotiation, and then they glare at you. And they don't say anything else, they just glare at you. The other type is really nice and agreeable, and they try to get you to agree with whatever they say, and you find yourself nodding a lot during the negotiation. They get you to like them so that you feel uncomfortable asking for more money for fear of disrupting the relationship. And they probably are really nice people. Be polite and pleasant, but firm to keep the negotiation going. I've left this part for last because it's very important. Women have to be careful, and it pains me to say it, but they have to be careful about how they negotiate in ways that men do not have to be careful. Men can stress their competence, their skills, their education, their experience, all of that as a standalone in the negotiation process. Women do best and statistically get offered more money if they approach things not just in polite, pleasant ways, but also the interest-based approach, and this is the important part, a collective approach. In other words, you want to frame things in terms of how your education, skills, and attributes will benefit the organization. Research has shown that if you lose sight of that in a negotiation, you pay what researchers call a social cost. Whether you're negotiating with a man or a woman, we've all been socialized to think that women are supposed to think of others first. And those biases can definitely come into play when you're negotiating on your own behalf. So think in terms of the collective and frame things in terms of what you have to offer the company, what you'll be able to do for the company or organization. And then last, keep in mind, always negotiate base pay first. And then you can negotiate on everything else. It could be vacation time, sign-on bonus, moving expenses, cell phone, gym memberships, travel expenses to and from work, working remotely, whatever it is that's important to you that might be important enough to take that over an extra 5,000 or whatever it is that you're trying to negotiate with the base pay. But remember that base pay is so important because everything after that is based on that base pay, because bonuses are a percentage of the base pay. And when you go to the next organization, now they're in some places, they're not allowed to ask for your salary history. In other places they are. So even your salary history, that base pay is going to follow you from one job to the next. So it's very important to do the best you can with the base pay. So in summary, let's go over some of the most common negotiation mistakes and how to avoid them. Always ask for the offer in writing and time to consider the offer. This buys you time to plan your negotiation approach, and it gives them time to worry about losing you to a competitor who might have extended a better offer. Prepare for every part of the process. That means doing your homework about the organization, what you're worth in the marketplace, any questions that you have for them, and so on, even before you have a phone screen with them. And know your worth so you don't set your sights too low. Oftentimes women will say to me, you know, I can get by on X amount, so I'm not going to ask for more. Well, you can get by, but if you can do better, why not do better? Keep in mind that nearly everyone has a bias that women should think of others first. So remember to talk about your education, experience, skills, and attributes in terms of how they'll benefit the organization. Otherwise, you're likely to pay a social cost in that negotiation. Now, after you've agreed on base pay, look at the other things that might be negotiable and don't be afraid to ask for them. Employers will often, for example, agree to that one-time allotment of money, like a sign-on bonus, but not a salary increase, because of course that'll cost them a lot more in the long run. I also want to talk a little bit about uptalk. As women, most of us were socialized to be pleasant and accommodating, to make others feel comfortable in our presence. One result of that that's supported by research, and I see it in my office very frequently, is that women, especially when they're nervous, will go up at the end of their sentences as if they're asking a question instead of making a statement, because we're instinctively taught that a statement could be seen in a negative light, like maybe too confrontational. as if they're asking, is it okay for me to negotiate, even though you lowball me so much that it's insulting and I feel like walking out, but I won't because I'm such a nice person. Uptalk at the end of the sentence immediately sucks the power back out of whatever sentence you've just said. So it's good to listen to yourself as you practice negotiating. I also see it when I do mock interviews with women. So practice it. You could use, for example, Big Interview on the Career Center website allows you to answer questions, and it's all taped. So you can go back over it and you can listen for uptalk and other things that you might want to change in your presentation of yourself. But something that's important to remember is that if you notice that you do uptalk, and if you especially do it when you're nervous, so in a negotiation would be a time that that would absolutely happen, practice beforehand, practice staying steady or going down at the end of your sentences. But when you get in there, don't think about it because it's too distracting. Even when I do mock negotiations and mock interviews with people, I ask them not to think about it while we're practicing, because it's so distracting, because they'll hear themselves go up and then they'll think, oh my gosh, I just blew it because that last statement was really important, and now I've gone up, and so I just let it go. Just go in with your research and your reasons and all those kinds of things and just let it go once you're in the negotiation. But definitely practice beforehand so that you sound as solid and confident as you possibly can. There's no silver bullet to solving pay equity, but there are things we can do, like negotiate. Can you think of other things that we can do in the chat box? Do you have other ideas of things that we can do on a larger scale, or it could be a smaller scale? While you're thinking about that, one thing I'd like to urge you to do is, as you get higher up within an organization, to ask, when was the last time we had a pay audit? It doesn't usually go over very well if you ask that from an entry-level position, but as you move up, you can ask those kinds of questions. And you can also keep in mind the things that we talked about today as you're interviewing and negotiating salaries with people, knowing that the biases exist, knowing that the pay gap exists, and doing what you can to close that gap. Do you have any other ideas about things that can be done? Or it could be any questions that you have. So if you have any questions, you can just drop them in the, sure. Dakota, could you please put the handouts again in the chat box? Thank you. So any questions, comments, ideas about what we can do? A training available to help with negotiations, one-on-one training where you can practice. Absolutely. Get in touch with me. I would love to do one-on-one negotiation practice with you. That way we can make it very specific to you. We could do it through Zoom if you're not in Colorado, or we can do it in my office, however you'd like. It's really fun. I know it's not as fun to do negotiations in real life, but it's fun for us to practice it. And it really does make a difference. If you have thought through how you're going to say things, like when you're wanting to ask for a raise where you're working, it really helps to have practiced that beforehand, to role play it beforehand, rather than to just bring it up in a meeting. Would anybody like to hear a little bit more about asking for a raise where you are, where you're working currently? Just drop that in the chat box if you would like to. Okay, so there are a number of different things to consider when you're thinking of asking for a raise in your current place of, in your current workplace. So one thing is timing. And let me say one thing about timing right now. Many organizations, because of the Great Resignation that you've all read and heard about and maybe are part of, employers are scrambling for talent, and they're willing to pay you more to keep you. They're willing to pay people more to get them to come to work for them. So typically I wouldn't say that the timing is great unless it's because usually you'll want to think about asking for a raise 1 to 2 months before the typical time that raises happen, like usually when the performance reviews happen. But this is a unique time. So if it's a long time before the performance review and before the possibility of raises is coming up, this could be a time that you ask for a raise. Now, there's some things that you'll want to keep in mind. What do you have as evidence that you can give them for why you should get a raise? So first of all, it's a good idea to, every time you do something that's, it's an accomplishment, or you've headed up a project that wasn't necessarily in your job description, or just anything that you feel will help build your case, write that down and drop it in a file so that when it does come time to ask for a raise, you've got all this information about the things that you've done. You've taken on these extra projects. Your job has changed radically in the last year. Several people have left, so you've taken on their roles as well as yours. All the kinds of reasons. What you never want to do is say, well, the cost of living has gone up. I'm paying more for rent and childcare, and so I need a raise. Always base it on merit. Why you deserve a raise, not why you need one, because of things that are going on outside, even though those things are going on. Some other things to think about, especially if they're particularly happy with you right now. So let's say you just saved the company a lot of money, or you just brought in a huge client, or you just streamlined a process that they've been dealing with and haven't been able to figure out for the last 5 years. That's a good time to ask. Let me think. If you've gotten new certifications, new tech skills, or new classes that you've gone to that now you're qualified to do X number of additional things. And it can be pretty easy. It can be a pretty easy conversation. It's nerve-wracking coming up to that conversation, but keep in mind that your manager is used to it. Your manager is used to people asking for raises. So to him or her, it's not that big of a deal. It feels like it to you, but for them, it's just another day where someone's asking. So it could be something as simple as, my role has grown in the past year because I've taken on X, Y, and Z, and I've exceeded my goals in this, and this area. can we discuss increasing my compensation to be more in line with what I'm doing now in my job? It can be as simple as that. And then usually the manager will ask for some time to think about it. Or they'll say, can we talk about it in our next one-on-one, the one that we're having next week? And that also gives you more time to gather whatever you might want to gather to show that you deserve that raise. And then if it turns out that the answer is no, you can ask what you can do, what you need, what skills you need to learn, what extra work you need to take on, whatever it is that you need to do so that you can get that raise or get a promotion. Does anybody have questions about that? Are there other aspects of it that you'd like to cover? Or any other questions? Okay, here's my contact information. So again, I would be happy to talk with any of you about salary negotiation or anything else that has to do with your professional development or job search, anything like that. I'd be delighted. So feel free to contact me at any time and we will set up a meeting. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And I hope to see you in my office or through a Zoom call. Bye.